1. Human zoos. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, human zoos were a popular attraction in Europe and America. These zoos featured indigenous people from different parts of the world, who were displayed like exotic animals for entertainment. Visitors paid to see these people in their natural habitats, often living in enclosures that resembled their homes. This practice was incredibly dehumanizing and cruel. 2. The Salem Witch Trials. In 1692, the Salem witch trials took place in colonial Massachusetts, where more than 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 19 of them were hanged, while one was crushed to death, and several others died in jail. The trials were based on little to no evidence and were largely driven by hysteria and fear. 3. Child labor in the Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, children as young as 6 years old were forced to work in factories, mines, and other dangerous jobs. They were often paid very little and worked long hours in hazardous conditions. Child labor laws were not established until much later, which left many children vulnerable to abuse and exploitation. 4. Japanese internment camps. During World War II, the US government forced thousands of Japanese Americans into internment camps, where they were held against their will for years. This was done based on the fear that they would side with Japan in the war. Many of these people lost their homes, businesses, and possessions and suffered from discrimination and racism. 5. The Tuskegee Experiment. From 1932 to 1972, the US government conducted a medical experiment on African American men in Tuskegee, Alabama, without their knowledge or consent. The experiment aimed to study the natural progression of untreated syphilis in black men. The men were never treated for their illness, even after a cure was discovered, and many died as a result. 6. The Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars fought between the 11th and 13th centuries. They were sanctioned by the Catholic Church and aimed to capture Jerusalem and other Holy Land territories from Muslim rule. The Crusades resulted in the death of countless people, including soldiers and civilians, and caused immense suffering and destruction. 7. The Transatlantic Slave Trade. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, millions of Africans were captured and transported to the Americas as slaves. The transatlantic slave trade was one of the largest and most brutal forced migrations in human history. Slaves were treated as property and subjected to inhumane treatment, including physical abuse, rape, and murder. 8. The Trail of Tears. In 1838, the US government forced thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in the southeastern US and relocated them to Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. The journey, which is now known as the Trail of Tears, was a forced march that caused the deaths of thousands of Native Americans from hunger, disease, and exposure.